hit record. I'll let Jackie do a fuller introduction of what this is and why we're here, but we wanted to start this off with with a brief land acknowledgement, just in recognition of this space that we are in, that we call home, and in recognition of everyone who has called this place home over the millennia. So I took some of this from a book I'm reading called The First Oregonians, and then supplemented it a little bit too. So it's maybe a little different than a traditional land acknowledgement, but here we go. The relationship between the language families in this region reveal patterns of human history that show the longevity of human affiliation with this place that we call home, call Oregon, call the Pacific Northwest. The cultural groups of the Columbia River Plateau, the Great Basin, the Sierra Nevada, and the Northwest Coast have historical, cultural, familial, and linguistic connections because of the interface of trading caravans that frequented our region's commercial hubs. In other words, many people have been living here for thousands of years, not only creating diverse cultures, languages and traditions, but also making connections through commerce, trading, stories, and knowledge, alliances, and marriage. Today, there are 9 federally recognized tribes within Oregon, each made up of many families, villages, or tribes. The Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Coquille Indian Tribe, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. In keeping with our theme here today of education, I wanted to highlight a particular Native-led institution right here at Portland State University that some of you may or may not have heard of, called the Institute for Tribal Government. I'm sharing this because I think it's important that we recognize work being done today and that's been done before my time anyway, on this important issue. The Institute is part of the Hatfield School of Government at PSU. It was co-founded by the late Roy Samsel, a member of the Choctaw Nation, a tribe and reservation in Oklahoma, and one of the largest in the United States. And the late Elizabeth First, former Oregon U.S. House member, who I had never heard of. While there are over 566 tribal governments in the United States, each with its own government structure, there is no national institution that provides training specifically designed for elected tribal leaders. Newly elected officials are often unfamiliar with the responsibilities of office, and they must assume multiple leadership duties with little or no systematic training. At the internal level, this can contribute to instability in the tribal community, and externally, tribal government officials are increasingly required to address complex intergovernmental issues with local, state, and federal jurisdictions. It's vital that tribal governments are able to actively protect their own rights. Too often, tribes must obtain assistance from non-Indian experts, many of whom know little about a particular tribe's legal and treaty rights. The primary goal of the Institute for Tribal Government is to assist tribes who want to cultivate the necessary expertise and governance skills within their own tribe, and to guide American government agencies with responsibilities and programs that interface with tribal programs. So there you go. I want to create a culture of having land acknowledgements that really give folks an opportunity to learn something, to take action. And in fact, if you really want to take action, you can donate that at that link. Okay, thank you all for taking the time to think through that somewhat untraditional land acknowledgement. And I'm going to pass it on to Jackie, and I'm going to stop talking for the rest of this time.
Thanks, Ari. If you came in the middle of when Ari was giving the land acknowledgement and your name is Ari, feel free to change that. Something's going on with the screen. We're not sure. So, hi, I'm Jackie Dixon. I'm glad to be here. I used to be part of the school climate or the climate justice committee years back, and I'm proud to be here as your vice president elect for PAT, and happy to work with so many amazing educators that are here and community folks. So thank you for being here with us. Our goals today are to provide a platform for teachers to highlight the creative and imaginative work done on climate change and climate justice at the class level. And part of creating a new world, a green, equitable, just world, is changing to a paradigm in which we collaborate, share work together, and we pull in the same direction. So we're also hoping to give other teachers an opportunity to derive ideas for things they can do, and to help PPS district staff get ideas of how to incorporate this work into their curriculum design. So helping build those bridges between district staff and teachers. PAT has co-sponsored every climate justice workshop since the beginning of the PPS Climate Justice Committee back in 2016. And as a result of the hard work we've done in collaboration with students and teachers, the Climate Justice Resolution with PPS was passed. So this isn't just a Climate Justice Committee workshop, though. This is one, and it's developed by the PPS Energy and Sustainability team, and we're thrilled to have them here as collaborators in this ongoing work. Lastly, this is the first climate justice teach-in we've had since the PPS climate crisis response policy was passed. Believe it or not, this pandemic and time, right, has been hard to track. There was always urgency in this work, but the policy brings a focus. It brings lofty long-term goals from which to work backwards from, and it brings a measure of accountability on the parts of the district, the community, the teachers, and everyone else involved. So a big part of that policy centers around our need to teach climate justice and climate change to our students, and that's why conversations like this are so important. So we continue to learn from each other, both professionally and personally, and as a community, we grow and heal. As Frere would hope, this is how we would begin to move towards popular education. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and feel free, if you have not already, to drop a little bit about yourself in the chat or introduce yourself, whether you're a panelist or a member joining here to learn with us today. We'd love to get to know each other in that way. So our panelists are Tim Swinehart from Lincoln High School. Tim teaches environmental justice and is a member of the Portland Public Schools Climate Justice Committee. He's active in working with district staff to devise and implement policies to help spread climate justice education across Portland Public Schools. Jesse Hunter is a second grade teacher at Woodstock Elementary in Southeast Portland. He's led efforts to establish school gardens and garden education programs at 2 different schools, Lent Elementary and currently Woodstock School. Erica Alabarca is a 6th grade social studies teacher at Roseway Heights, where she helps organize an after-school eco club. Erica's worked with student leaders in developing a climate justice activist camp and creating the Regenerative Gardening Project. She's an active member of the Portland Public Schools Climate Justice Committee and part of the Teacher Advisory Council for the Portland Art Museum. Trios Bullock is a teacher at McDaniel High School. He teaches climate justice and chemistry, and he's an active member of the PPS School Climate Justice Committee. Gerald Scretchens is a teacher at Grant High School. He teaches human rights and environmental justice. And he's been an important mentor, educator, and advocate for many of the student climate activists from Tubman Middle School, currently protesting the expansion of the Houston.
Houston.
Okay.
If you just came in, Julio, could you go ahead and mute yourself?
Sullivan tried to help me out by.
Thanks. Susanna Kasuf is a first-year teacher at Grant High School with a deep background in grassroots climate justice organizing. She's focused this year on turning her classroom into a place for connection, community, justice, and love. Joe Ferguson is the Natural Resources Science and Instructional Facilitator at Alliance High School. He incorporates climate science and sustainability lessons into his classrooms, from setting up wildlife cameras at Whitaker Ponds to partnering with Community Cycling Center for an entire semester of bike mechanic lessons. I want to sign up. That sounds awesome. Kat Fung is the North Portland Youth Grow Educator and Community Organizer for Growing Gardens. She's a first-generation Vietnamese American gardener and cook with a background in environmental science and outreach. We have so many amazing panelists, y'all. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking for a long time, but we're almost ready to get started. Caitlin Blood is a former farmer and agricultural advisor. She's currently the Director of Sustainability at Mitch Charter School, where she works to root classroom content in an agricultural framework. Throughout the year, students explore subjects like math, language arts, science, and history through hands-on agricultural observation and practice. Angeles Martinez is a community organizer, garden coordinator, and bilingual garden educator for Growing Gardens Powell Butte neighborhood. She's seen gardening as a pathway to help students become more self-sufficient. All right, so without much further ado, we're gonna get into these questions. And I have some folks who may be interested in answering these questions, but I do want to be clear with our panelists. If you want to jump in somewhere, please unmute yourself if you have something that you're burning to share. We want to hear about it. So my first question is going to be, how do you teach about the climate crisis without leaving students in despair? How might art, activism, or community involvement play a key factor in that? And I'm going to ask Susanna to start us off.
Okay. It's funny that I'm called on this because I feel like I'm asking myself this question all the time. Like, to be honest, I sometimes am scared to teach about the climate crisis because it is so dire and it is so scary. And I can imagine being 15 years old, sitting there being told like really what's coming. And it's really scary. And I think you kind of said this in the question, but I really do think that the only response is activism. At least in my own life, that's been my experience. And I try to share with students my own story of feeling so lost, really, when I realized how bad the climate crisis was and not being able to really find myself until I got involved in the movement. And to me, like, I think it's very common and maybe hip or whatever right now to really give into climate fatalism. And I think that rather than think so far into the future about so much that can be lost, I'm trying to remember like what can be saved, and that like every battle that we win against the fossil fuel industry really can mean millions of lives. And it's in doing that work that we can kind of create the hope that we need to keep going. So maybe I
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. Do we have some others, maybe Trios or Caitlin, that want to jump in?
Sure. I think that there's kind of a couple of different lines here. One that has really been a strong experience in McDaniel has been in our chemistry classes. We do a climate justice fair where students teach each other about activists who have campaigns, where the chemistry is showing up, where the justice is showing up, where the challenges with trustworthy media show up, and then how they've been impacted by learning about the activist and the campaign and related campaigns. And we do it in the library. This year was our 6th year, and the sophomore class was teaching the freshman class modern world history students, and it was just like this buzzing energy of connectivity and diversity, and way more that you could learn about than what anybody doesn't could really like take hold of. And it just gave this sense of the magnitude and diversity of people who are taking actions. And I think that's been a really inspiring event that's part of the curriculum that we've developed. At the same time, I feel like it's really important that we not, even though we don't want to leave students in despair, we don't want to turn away from grief. I feel like a big part of the work is eliciting and metabolizing grief. And I personally am really struggling with how to, it's really different with each group, the ability to develop a space where there's trust enough for a student to share their grief. When that has happened, I've also seen that be a powerful catalyst for empowerment and action. And just, I know when we've had genuine grief expressed in class, it's marked everybody's soul in a way that you don't forget. And I think it can really be an inspiration, particularly when it's shared, grief. And one of the kind of new things that I've been doing is what we call climate justice tag. And we start out class in our climate justice class with students sharing a piece of artwork that represents something they feel is important and share where they connected to climate justice. And then students share their responses, and some of those responses
I'm not a resistant.
express the full range of thought and emotion in ways that are much more alive and present to some of this than I'm able to elicit in a planned lesson of some kind. So those are a couple of things that have really been inspirational in this film.
I think building on what Trioth was just saying, and Susanna, in terms of empowering students, that's how I try to come at it as well. I work with elementary school students, so littles. So trying to communicate the idea, of how is our world being impacted right now is we come at it through biodiversity. And so when Susanna says like, teaching about what can be saved and then doing that work to create the hope, that's a big one for us. So our focus at Mitch is to save indigenous varieties of seeds, so seeds that belong to indigenous communities throughout North and South America. It's been a big learning experience for me in that when I first started farming, like as a white person, I think, oh, okay, saving the seeds that's good enough, right? Like having the seeds, maintaining the biodiversity in general is good enough. But what I've learned since I started teaching was that, like, for my students to think that these seeds are now theirs, and that they don't need to be returned, or another term that we've been learning is rematriation. And the seed rematriation movement has been a big one for us this year. That has been really important for them to understand too, in terms of not just preserving biodiversity or preserving these seeds in general, but making sure that you're really preserving them in a way that does them and the people that they belong to justice, right? And so that's a big lesson for students, and a lesson that empowers them too, is because then in our curriculum, they learn about indigenous histories, struggles, oppression, and then resilience, right? So one of our seeds is the Cherokee North Georgia Candy Roaster squash, or another one is the Cherokee Trail of Tears bean. And so they learn about the Cherokee tribe and all of the ways that they have experienced oppression, but then all of the ways that they have shown resilience in those situations. And we start the seeds at the school, we grow the seeds, and then we send them back to the tribes or to a seed bank or a seed library that is our attempt at rematriation. And there's a lot of nuance to it that I've been learning about especially this past year. But I really have seen my students feel empowered in that way, in that, you know, they understand that by saving these seeds and growing these plants and then harvesting the seeds again to return to the tribe, that is justice in a way that they can contribute to. So
I also teach at the elementary level, and I guess how I come at this is to be able to care about something, we have to have a connection with it. And so I've been involved with creating school gardens since 2009. And just even in this last year, we've really transformed the land in our school garden area. And so I feel like to teach kids about how to heal our planet, you have to start by getting them to care about their little piece of land. And it's been pretty magical at times. Just recently, I was out working in the garden with my students, and we had this magical moment where this hummingbird came and visited in the middle of a lesson. That whereas, you know, previously we never had pollinators like that because it was just bare grass. So I think giving kids opportunities to, yes, do serious, rigorous science and math out in the garden, but being able to care for plants is really transformational. And, you know, a student will tell you, like, I planted that plant. They can tell you the exact plant that they planted. And so getting them to fall in love with our planet by first falling in love with their small piece of land, especially at this age, at 7 and 8 year olds, then later on, they can start to make broader connections between, you know, humans and the environment and their role in healing our planet.
Absolutely. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. So what is the most inspiring thing that has happened as a result of your environmental justice teaching? And I'm wondering, Scretch, if you can kick us off on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. I'm honored to sit on the panel with such intelligent educators, most who I've worked with in one space or another. So thank you so much for just presenting this, Ari, as well as Jackie. Yeah, it's been a number of years now, but the most inspiring thing that's happened along my journey in facilitating climate and environmental justice is gathering a small group of students who attended Tubman Middle School and just really presenting a matter of truth to the students of what is going on right in their backyard, this issue of environmental justice in under-resourced neighborhood, which is the historical Albina neighborhood. which has seen so many discrimination and so much disparity, and just presenting this to them and finding out if students really wanted to make great change, and making that great change by engaging in policy making. And through that, sitting with this group of students and really going to some of the experts and learning what to do, what needs to be done, and then taking all of that information and taking that down to the state capitol at Salem and lobbying like adults would, speaking to adults and advocating for the change, and not necessarily shaming, but really in a professional manner saying that we need change now. And as I was just speaking to students a couple of weeks ago, what this group of 16 students did, and plus working with Tim Swinehart's students over at Lincoln, what they did in a matter of 5 months, adults could not do in a matter of 10 years. And that is the inspiration. And I figure within that group of students, if we could create agents of change, we created 30 agents of change. Imagine how many lives they will go out and change. And that's an inspiration. And I still say that to this day, till this day. I said it just a couple of weeks ago. If I'm speaking to a classroom of students and we're speaking about environmental justice, if I can incept this into the minds of 2 to 3 students, I feel like I've done my job. I feel like those 2 or 3 students will become agents of change and change so many lives. And yes, I want everyone to learn from what I'm facilitating around climate justice and environmental justice, but really I just need 2 or 3 that are just so engaged and they go out with the leadership. So it's been very inspiring because now students are sophomores, and the work that they're doing, I'm like, they don't even need me. You know, they don't need me at all. So I feel like that's been inspiring because they're out on their own and they're leading and they're independent. They're out there on Fridays, they're out there on Wednesdays in front of ODOT. So that's been truly inspiring to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's a reflection of your passion too, and the passion that you bring to the work, and it's contagious, right? So they see it, they want to do what they can, and they keep on passing it on, right, to the younger generations. Because I'm hearing those the students at Tubman right now too, loud and clear. All right. Do we have any other panelists that want to respond to that question, or should I keep it moving? I know we had a little bit of a slow start, so I just want to be mindful of our time. All right.
I would just jump in and say, I mean, one of the students last year in the climate justice class went on to do a kind of national podcast interview series and become a paid lobbyist for climate justice work at the state level. And just amazing to see, just to resonate with Scratch, the dedication and commitment that some of the students are going right into, kind of using our courses as a jumping.
Jackie, if I could follow that real quickly. You know, I was going to contrast with these, like, you know, incredible stories of activism that we're hearing from Scratch and Trioth, you know, and you know, our hope is absolutely that our students can move on to do that kind of amazing work in the world. You know, and I think I would add that I've also been really inspired watching students do, you know, what we might consider to be sort of smaller work, but like within our own school communities, you know. And so to watch students who have learned about environmental justice issues on the Willamette River, for example, and then to watch them, you know, develop a workshop that they then take to other freshman classes at Lincoln, you know, or to a couple of years ago to have parents come and, you know, to do some evening workshops on some of the things that, you know, that they feel like have been really transformational for them. And so I think that there are ways that we can encourage really incredible activism within our own school communities, and, you know, and like nurturing that and making space for that. you know, as a way that I think a lot of our students who may not see themselves as like, you know, the leaders in the streets behind the bullhorn, but that, you know, they might see themselves as somebody who can be part of a group of 3 or 4 students that can give, you know, can give a workshop, and that's another way of kind of changing lives, especially I think their own.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm thinking of, I think I saw her earlier pop in, but work Amy Lindahl was doing, gosh, it must have been like 2008, early in my teaching career, over at Marshall High School, where students were looking at the water quality, right? And I think the quality of water and air in Portland Public Schools buildings continues to be, you know, questionable, and it's right here in our environment. So of course, students are interested. Is the air that I'm breathing safe? Is the water that I'm drinking safe? So I think it's definitely a way to keep it personal, local, and immediate. I'm going to move on now to question 3. And what kind of support do you need from your school or school district to strengthen your environmental justice teaching? Wondering if Erica, you can start us off on this question.
Hi there. Yeah, you know, I teach middle school. I just started teaching 6th grade social studies, language arts. And I felt like in the past, 6 years, we've done this climate justice work, having more collaboration, more attention from the district, and time to really learn and focus on climate justice. We've been doing this for a while, and I think that there's a lot of people who are like just learning about the climate justice work that was started like 6 years ago. So getting that organized, getting that into every school, making administrators aware of this initiative is huge. That really can set the tone. And I think that if like administrators in district that isn't really pushing that, you know, there can be work done within communities as well, like from teachers and outside organizations to really push that, because you know, as we see even like today, like a lot of that power, a lot of the way things gets moved is through our parents, through our communities. So and if they're seeing that, and the students already are, then that's a powerful thing to get it into schools. I took a year study leave to learn about climate justice, actually, and how to. And so I think one thing that I needed to do in that year was learn about climate change and climate justice. As much as I was an advocate and on this committee, and like I really didn't, it was hard for me to understand the whys and hows of it. And it took me a bit of effort to really understand why the climate is changing, you know, and like really understand it so I could teach it to kids. So I think, you know, taking the time to do that, I can now teach it with more confidence and be more creative with how I address climate change in the work that I do with the curriculum that I have. And that was huge for me. And I'm thinking there's a lot of teachers out there who want to do this work, but are a little bit apprehensive about it because they may not have all the you know, understanding around it. And so that's kind of scary. And to also not have curriculum or not have support around it makes it even more of an effort among all the other different things that we're doing as teachers. So again, that sort of support from schools, knowledge and time to work together and to educate ourselves, and to really gain from one another. You know, there's so much great stuff that we put together through the years, from different things that people have created, and just like, how do we make that more widespread? How do we learn from one another? I think that'd be great if that got supported more. So.
If it's okay, if I jump in just real quickly here. I'd like to speak to this question in terms of school gardens. So like I said, I've been working on, with the support of many others, to create school gardens since 2009. And ultimately, I want to see the school district really support school gardens and recognize their tremendous educational value for teaching about climate justice and any number of things, for improving nutrition and student wellness as well. And I don't want school gardens to just hinge on a really passionate person like me. I want to see paid garden educators. All of this work that I've done has been volunteer because I really care about it. But ultimately, for school gardens to be successful, we need to have paid garden educators / coordinators in all the schools that have school gardens, because otherwise, it's not truly sustainable. So in addition to that, I would love to see a climate justice curriculum that starts really young. I don't think that young children are too young to learn about these kinds of issues. And in fact, I feel like all of us, whether we're adults or children, want to be involved with something purposeful. We want to know that we can have an impact. From a very young age, children feel that way, and they know the difference when they're being asked to do something that is relevant to their lives and is making an impact for their community. And so I'd like to, see that reflected in the curriculum that we have and support for school gardens. Thank you.
I agree, Jesse. I would really, the integration of hands-on learning experiences, like the ones that you don't even need to go to a school garden. You don't even need to have a school garden. You can interact with seeds. You can start things, in a window or even just outside the school building. My school's out in a business park. We're just boxed into a business park, and we've just kind of carved out a little bit of soil for ourselves. But I really think integrating this kind of hands-on experience into core classroom time is so important. And this year, just due to sub shortages, I've taught in grade level classrooms more than I have in the past. And I've seen how once you have the foundational knowledge, it is so easy to integrate this stuff into your classroom. It's right there. The students grab onto it. It's something that they can feel and touch, and then they can take it into all sorts of subjects: writing, math, science, history. It's so accessible. And if we could help our teachers, who are in classroom all day, all year with the same group of kids, for this to be accessible to them, man, I think you wouldn't need people like us. You wouldn't need volunteers, because teachers would be taking this on their own.
It's almost like we need the administrators up at top to believe in this. And that's exactly what's lacking. And I've seen it for so many years now. They're not even willing to sit in a PD and listen to climate justice education and environmental justice education. And at the top, if they do not even believe in this, and I won't call that as a definite answer, but if they're not willing to support it and support the teachers in the trenches, then how far are we going to be able to take this curriculum? We won't have the backing, we won't have the resources to get out into the field. We will always have to rely on staying in the classroom. And there's only so much you can do within the classroom. And I think it requires that we begin to look at people who are going to run our district who really think outside of the box, right? They have the training and they have the know-how to run a district in a completely opposite way than I would, but they lack this knowledge of the current crisis that is going on now. And if they can't accept the training and then facilitate that training onto the teachers within the buildings, then not much will change. We need classes that approach climate justice, not just from a scientific background, but from a social background, a human behavior background, social sciences. And I have a lot of students who they are very interested, but they simply are not ready to access the climate crisis from a scientific background. Therefore, we need to talk about how humans are behaving towards each other, how we have been behaving towards each other in the West and broader on a global scale for the last 400 or 500 years. So I really think we should advocate for hiring administrators who will make that change up at the top and then bring it to us. Thanks.
Absolutely. And that is a great lead into our next question. How do you see the connection between teaching for climate justice and teaching for racial justice? Angeles, are you able to answer now? Are you with us?
Hey, hi everybody. Hola.
Hola.
Hola. La pregunta es, ¿cómo ves la conexión entre justicia para el clima y justicia racial? ¿Qué quieres responder?
Bueno, pienso que algo de lo que nos hemos olvidado es los orígenes de nuestras semillas y cómo cuidar la tierra, especialmente de manera natural, porque tengo una palabra que me encanta decir, que si la tierra es buena, es muy saludable, nosotros vamos a ser saludables.
One of the important things to remember is just the origin of seeds and how we can care for the earth in a natural way. One of the sayings is how can, if the earth is good and healthy, then we can also be healthy.
También algo que ha hecho las grandes empresas es meter demasiados químicos, acelerar el proceso natural de las plantas, de las verduras, de los animales. Entonces, eso a nuestro cuerpo, cuando nos alimentamos, de alguna manera nos afecta. Y si nos afecta a nosotros como adultos, ¿cómo irá a afectar a nuestros niños, que son el futuro?
So one of the things large companies have done is put a lot of chemicals into the earth and into the land. So, and those chemicals can accelerate growth. And if that can affect us as adults, just imagine what it is doing to the children.
También soy una persona que cree en la magia que tiene la tierra y la conexión con nosotros, y eso de alguna manera nos ayuda a nuestra mente a estar saludable, que es algo que ahorita estamos pasando por muchas situaciones difíciles. Entonces, qué mejor manera de agarrar un poco de terapia y invitar a nuestros niños a que tengan un poco de terapia al momento de agarrar las semillas, la tierra. Siento que eso es la mejor terapia.
As a person, I believe that there is some magic in the land, and that being in with the land is really can help our mind stay healthy as well. You know, there's a lot going on, and being in the garden is like therapy. And so for our children to get to hold the seeds and be with the land is a little bit of therapy for them as well.
La última cosa que me gustaría es de que nosotros somos responsables de enseñarles sus primeros pasos a nuestros niños. Entonces, qué mejor manera de enseñarles cómo cuidar la tierra, cómo cuidar el agua, cómo cuidar nuestros árboles, las plantas, cómo conservar las semillas naturales, que es muy, muy importante. Y de esa manera, para el futuro de ellos, que ellos tengan que tengan el conocimiento de cómo crecer saludablemente.
And the lesson is just that we are responsible for teaching children how they can also care for the earth. So how they can take their first steps in caring for water, for plants, for seeds, and that they are going to be the future and how they can also be healthy themselves.
Muchas gracias por compartir tus ideas. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak to that question as well? So what is the connection between teaching for climate justice and teaching for racial justice?
Can. So I feel like this is one of the things that I understood but didn't really understand until I started teaching it. But the foundation of climate injustice and the foundation of racial injustice are so clearly rooted in colonization. Like they're just like two hands to like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. But like the whole idea in colonization is that we can decide that all these people don't matter because they're of an inferior race. And when we do that, what we're going to do is come in and just like destroy the land. And we're going to put forth this idea that the land is no longer like so many indigenous worldviews see the land as like a relative, but colonization then comes in and says land is no longer a relative, it's no longer alive, it's a resource that we're going to take and use, and then we're going to like take all this land from you people because you don't matter, and then we'll take the people too and they can help us work the land, and it's so connected. And there's really no way that you could have climate injustice without racism, because you can't have polluting factories if the people who live around the factories matter. And we often say that these people don't matter because they're Black or they're brown or they're poor. So we can put our factories there, whether that's in this country or whether that's in another country, that these people don't matter. So if we created a world where everybody mattered, there can't be climate injustice. And if we really were focusing on a world where we're getting rid of climate injustice, it would have to be focused on this world where people, everybody matters.
I absolutely agree. And Angeles was talking about what corporations have, how they put synthetic chemicals into the earth. And it connects back, you've got corporations and you've got colonization, and they are in many instances one and the same. And so I just have one kind of example of how we see racial justice and climate justice intertwine in our elementary school classrooms, and it's through discussing the realities of indigenous communities. And so our students learn that indigenous communities in North America have lost 99% of their historical lands. But we look at which lands those are, like where are those lands located and how has that impacted the tribes in terms of the climate that they're experiencing. And so what studies have shown is that on average, tribes in the states are experiencing 2 additional days of extreme heat each year. But for tribes like the Hopi, and we grow 2 seeds from the Hopi community. One is the black dye sunflower, and then the other is the Hopi red dye amaranth. And so in the case of the Hopi tribe, they have 57 days above 100 degrees on average on their reservation lands, compared to on their historical lands, they only had 2 days of extreme heat, or 2 days of above 100 degrees on average. So you really see it's like, it's quite clear. And it's quite clear to elementary students as well. And so, yeah, that point can be demonstrated, I think, very easily in an elementary school classroom as well.
All right, I'm going to move us to the next question, but if something comes up or pops up for any of our panelists that you want to share, do feel free to unmute at any time and share a story. So tell us a story about a student who has been strongly affected by climate justice teaching. I'm wondering, Erica and Trio, if you might have some stories you want to share.
Yeah, you know, I feel.
Sure.
Oh, you want to go, Trio? No.
Go for it.
Hey, okay. I don't know if there's any one particular student, but like, I mean, there are several students. I think it's just inspiring, like as many have mentioned, just how students have become leaders within the district or their classes, organizing like marches. And I just think the way that they like are so ready to organize and so open to hear and push climate justice not into the classroom, but into their legislation and all these different things, and their voices, like, you know, this is not even my student, but these are people that I kind of kids who came up and we've worked together even outside of school, like Ada Crandall, who's Scratch's kid, old student. She's a sophomore now in Grant and is like almost every week is in the newspaper, you know, just staying on message and speaking truth to power. And she came to this climate justice activist camp that helped organize and so on. And there's other students who are now in college, but they're the ones who organized that camp. You know, they put it together. And even my kiddos in my eco club, they're so good at organizing. Like they, it's just really inspiring to see them take a concept and then want to connect with one another. So I think that's another thing that should think about facilitating, is that these kids sometimes feel really isolated from one another. And they struggle, like with any organizing movement, with like, how do we communicate? How do we coordinate with one another? And so like really working with them, because they're right there. They're pushing the envelope. They're taking in all these ideas, and it's just really, you know, if you give them an opportunity, it's so amazing what they do with it. So it wasn't as specific as I wanted it to be, but you know, that's the sense I keep getting every year that I participate in this.
Trio, did you have a story you wanted to share as well? Okay. Okay, I'm realizing there are a couple of our panelists that we haven't heard from yet. So Kat or Jesse, if either one of y'all feel inspired at any point to jump in, feel free. Or Joe, not Jesse. Sorry, we did hear from Jesse. If you had a story you want to share, that would be amazing.
Kat, I know, had to jump off.
Oh, okay. That's why. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question, and we can pop back up if we want. So maybe Joe, if this one speaks to you, it would be great to hear from you. You've all taught climate change and climate justice in different ways throughout your teaching career. So tell us a bit about some of those practical elements. So what has worked well and what hasn't? What types of lessons have really engaged students? What have been some of your biggest challenges introducing climate education into your classroom?
Hey everybody, sorry about that. I'm kind of in transit right now, setting up. I'm coaching t-ball, so hey, do you want to say hi? Yeah, so I teach at Alliance High School at Meek. It's one of the alternative schools in Portland Public, and this year I've just had a great time teaching some pretty very hands-on. A lot of really nice work happening with community partners. Just highlight those for a moment. I've worked with Wind and Oar Boat School, and they make boats out of wood. And so we really kind of dug into looking into historical wood producing industry in Oregon, of course. And then what does it mean to really harvest sustainably and use sustainable wood products? So we got to tour some sustainable farms and look at really how some of these foresters are stewards of the land in addition to profiting off of wood products. And then the most recent partnership that we've kindled up, I think you mentioned this earlier on, is with the Community Cycling Center. And this has been my last 2 terms in a row. We've done bicycle physics, and students get to learn how to fix a bike. They learn how to tune brakes, how to tune derailleurs, how to true wheels, how to get their bike up and running. And then the program they actually earn the bike at the end. So they get to keep the bike, and they know how to do some basic maintenance on it. And then really infusing into that the idea of well, a lot of transportation justice, but also, of course, handedly, of course, climate justice as well. If we can get kids, back on bikes frequently, one less car, right? And we know that's good. Hang on, babe. And then see what the other class was. Oh, I guess you mentioned the trail cams earlier. So last year during remote learning, I was able to set up 8 different wildlife trail cams at Whitaker Ponds. And so the kids got to do a really nice wildlife study of Urban Park and got to see really cool stuff. We caught river otters over there. We got lots of coyotes, raccoons, beaver. And really, the kids really were really stunned at the biodiversity just in their urban park. And that was really cool because we know we would study the watershed. Meek is in the Columbia City watershed, and so we know all the water that drains to the Whitaker Ponds, and they know that those critters are living down there. So you can see that connection right there. And then other class I've been doing this year. Oh, our garden. Yeah, school garden. I know there's been a lot of panelists have talked about that already today. Yeah, it's been really fun. We've got kids designing a water catchment system right now. And we have about 300 starts that we're going to be selling at our campus Wednesday, Friday, and then next Wednesday and Friday. We got tomatoes, peppers, lots of good stuff. So yeah, and again, just being as positive as possible, giving kids the idea that you can actively do something to curb climate change. And that can be a career. That can be something you can do and make a difference in the world and make money and have fun. So.
Thank you. Sounds amazing. I wish my teachers did this type of stuff when I was in school. Don't we all? I also just wanted to pass on, I know Rachel Haynes was one of the folks I wanted to ask about this question, and she just wanted me to pass on she wishes she could be here. She had a little bit of an emergency and she's okay, but wishes she was here with us. Angeles, are you still with us? Yes.
Sí.
Would you like me to repeat the question, Anna, or do you have it?
I have it. Entonces, básicamente la pregunta es si puedes explicar las lesiones y cómo, no sé, unas ideas prácticas de cuáles funcionan y cuáles no.
Sí. Bueno, algo que conmigo ha funcionado mucho es el salvar semillas. Y también lo que ha funcionado también conmigo es la manera de cómo las propias plantas tienen muchas vitaminas, y esas mismas plantas cuando se descomponen con la tierra, al próximo año cada vez la tierra es mejor y mejor, y cada año obtengo mejores verduras, mejores frutas.
So she says she saves seeds, and also the plants themselves have a lot of vitamins. So when they decompose, she just leaves them there and the earth gets better and better. Can I add one thing just more as a coworker? No sé si Ángeles, ¿quieres explicar tus lecciones de tres hermanas?
Sí,
We invite her to
también.
share what the lesson unit is that all this fits in.
Sí, también algo que ha funcionado mucho conmigo, especialmente este año en persona con los niños, es de que he tenido unas lecciones en español de las tres hermanas, que son el maíz, el frijol, la calabaza, y muchos niños realmente aprendieron bastante, crecieron sus propias plantas de las tres hermanas en los salones, tuvieron mucho éxito. Cocinamos tortillas y cada uno hizo sus propias tortillas. Conocieron también un poco acerca de que la palabra maíz no está en español, sino que está en un dialecto que es náhuatl, que es un dialecto nativo de México. ¿Y cuántos dialectos tenemos en México? También cuántos tipos de maíz tenemos. Entonces, sí.
So Angeles teaches a unit on the three sisters, so growing beans, corn, and squash at Spanish immersion, the schools with Spanish immersion programs. And she shared that the students learned a lot. They grew their own plants. They also learned to cook tortillas from scratch. And they also learned that the word maíz isn't actually a Spanish word. It originated in Nahua, a dialect in Mexico. So they learned about the different dialects of Mexico, and also just how many different kinds of corn originate in Mexico.
Algo que puedo compartir que no ha funcionado conmigo es como hacer un plan de la plantar plantas y semillas. Soy como más como una hoja que va flotando en el río y solo se deja llevar, y lo que tenga a la mano es lo que ocupo.
One thing she hasn't worked for is making a set plan for planting, because I'm like a leaf on the river that goes floating along, and it just happens as it happens.
Entonces solamente quería compartir una última cosa de que la semana pasada fue mi última clase en una de las escuelas y fue para mí muy bonito. Bonito y triste a la vez, porque yo les dije a los niños, oh, esta es mi última clase con ustedes, y ver la reacción que tuvieron algunos de, oh, ¿por qué? es tan bonito personalmente, porque tiene un impacto mi enseñanza a los niños, y algo bueno aprendieron, y cuando sean adultos lo van a recordar.
And one thing I want to share that was beautiful and sad at the same time is that last week was my last lesson. And when I told them it was the last lesson, the kids went, oh no. And it was a very beautiful moment personally to see that I had an impact of doing something good with the kids and something they'll remember even when they're adults.
Gracias, Angeles. So I have like a question to build on this question, since we have a lot of panelists here who are veteran climate justice teachers, right? Like, what advice would you give to new teachers or to teachers who are just starting their climate justice journey? Like, how to get started, right? How to help build their tool belt.
I could offer a little bit. I also wanted to jump back to the connection between racism and climate justice a little bit. I think it's few and far between that anybody is an expert, in the global challenge of really understanding the climate crisis, and that a lot of what we're doing is jigsawing the work with our students, identifying the questions and the problems. I can't pretend to be an expert, and I don't have the time to keep up with everything. And by jigsawing that and inviting students to teach each other, but holding the space for that work to happen and guiding it and bringing in inspiration and keeping space open for what's happening right now. It keeps it fresh and alive, and it distributes power in the community, which is really what we need to learn how to do as part of deep democracy. I really appreciate the just transition framework concept maps of transforming colonial economies into regenerative economies, and that's really helpful. The other thing locally is, one of the things we did this year was get maps of the historic redlining in Portland, maps of the tree canopy, maps of air pollution by neighborhood and asthma rates, and have students just look at those. And as in 2009, the deaths were predicted accurately by zip code in the Northwest, where they would occur during a major heat wave, as they did this summer, where we had over 1,000 deaths in our region. And the traditionally red line neighborhoods are at the apex of that. And that's an expression of the ongoing legacy of systemic racism in our communities. And we can do very specific actions around where trees are, and where pollution is cited here locally. And those are action items that we can all participate in. And things.
Jackie, if I could jump in, I was going to add to this conversation about what things that work well, and wanted to connect back to a couple things that Scratch was saying a couple minutes ago. I really appreciate, that Joe was talking about connecting with community organizations. I think that a lot of the most meaningful work that I've been able to do over the years with students has been in collaboration with different community organizations, people who are experts and who are doing the work of environmental justice, climate justice in the community. So whether it's the Braided River campaign that has an exhibit up right now in our district office, whether it's Neighbors for Clean Air that Scratch and I, went down to Salem with, to do clean air advocacy, and those are just a couple of examples. But I think, again, I appreciate the fire that you were talking with, Scratch, and I want to channel a little bit of that fire. We need support from our school district. We are the teachers that are trying to do this work and have been trying to do this work are operating in a sort of a wilderness in a way, to use a really crappy metaphor based on colonization. But, the school district could provide connections to community groups, could facilitate those connections, could set up opportunities for teachers to meet with those organizations. But I think, again, we have to start from a place of trust. We have to trust that the people doing the work in the community organizations are the leaders that we want our students in touch with. And in terms of what Trioth is saying about, jigsawing and working in constant collaboration with our students, we've got to trust that the teachers on this call and all the other teachers out there, are the right people to be, developing and facilitating climate justice curriculum. We have to dispel with this notion that, that somehow Portland Public Schools, didn't have a curriculum, right? Until a certain administration shows up, right? I mean, we hear this sometimes now. We heard this 15 years ago with previous administrations. And it's, it's like the worst part's actually not that it's disrespectful, it's that it's not productive. Like, look at all the expertise on this call alone. And if we were facilitating a way to get, as a school district, to get teachers together to build the community connections, to build the curriculum, to share, I mean, we could do incredible things. But we need the support of our district to do that, and we have not been getting it.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to drop, you guys probably already know about this, but the Zen Education Project has a campaign of Teach Climate Justice, and there's just like a lot of really good resources there, including A People's Curriculum for the Earth, really great book if you're like a book kind of person. Wait, I just had another idea, and now my brain has totally blanked out. Oh yeah, I don't know. One main thing that I think is just really important when teaching about climate justice education is you don't want to put the guilt on the kids. You don't want to put the guilt on like the individual. Sure, we can make our individual changes, and I think that's good for like our spirits and our karma, but that's not going to be the change that we need to see in our world. And so we really need to put the guilt where it belongs, on the fossil fuel industry, on these big polluting corporations, and make kids feel empowered that they have a voice, that they can be part of, a change that can outlast them, right? One of my favorite writers, Rebecca Solnit, she talks about activist work as like laying tinder. So just over time, you're like laying all this tinder, and you might not see stuff change really fast in you might not see a change at all in your lifetime. But what we see over and over again in history is that something will come, a spark will light, and then all that tinder that's been laid for years, decades by activists will light, and things can change very fast. And so I think making sure that we put the guilt where it belongs, but also that we really teach with hope in mind that these kids can be part of this change, I think is just really critical.
Thank you, Susie, and thanks, Tim, as well. And that's such a big part of this, approaching this curriculum as a human speaking to humans. Therefore, I constantly let my students know when I'm about to present this information, I'm not coming down on you at all, right? And along with that, of me not coming down on their decisions, because this is such an important time in their life, and something as basic as their own food sovereignty right now, even though we may not like the way that looks, that is so important to them as well. But we are just providing them facts. We are providing students facts. And part of that, I always approach these conversations with solutions as well. And I'll say it to them. I say, I keep presenting you with problems, but if we keep stating problems and we don't have any solutions to the problems, then we're part of the problems. So let's look at some of these solutions. I've had a lot of success teaching units on agriculture and land use, teaching about the history of our chemical agricultural industries, how they were involved in so much warfare before they turned on the people and before they turned on the land. And students really enjoy learning about this because they have no clue about monocropping practices in the United States, about how 8 to 9/10 of their food comes from one plant. So these are important issues for people to learn about. They have no clue of why our rainforests are being deforested in South America and in Indonesia. We just lack that knowledge, and students love to learn about this. And oftentimes I have students coming in just dedicating themselves to making small changes. And if enough people can begin to make those small changes and step up, then we're going to see big changes. And part of that is activism. And one thing that I think is really important too is completely dismantle the line between climate and environmental justice and the racist past of colonial settlerism. In my classroom, the first thing we learn about in my class is first contacts of Columbus with the Arawak peoples, with the First Peoples. And we take a look at the example of exactly what happened in the Caribbean in the matter of 3 to 4 years. And I say to them, this sets the foundation for the entire class. It sets the foundation for the entire class, the precedent for how we treat the land, how we treat the people, and how that we remove that directly from the eyes of students in the United States, and we place it in other countries now. So we do not have to see it, right? And what's neocolonialism look like? So I really invite people to always remember that you have so many different students out there with learned experiences, and you have to teach it as a human. You have to let them know that every day you're making mistakes, but trying to get better. And then you have to teach them about the social aspects of colonial settlerism, white supremacy, and how that all really affects what is happening right now in the world.
I think as a 6th grade teacher, because the social studies standards had changed, one thing I wanted to focus on was geography. And because I really believe that, you know, to teach climate justice is to kind of have a connection to place, right? So why are different places special? What makes them unique? And it allowed me to introduce a lot of vocabulary for them that really set a foundation in which I don't really have to teach them in some ways, like the issue. I mean, it makes it easier to talk about the issues when they understand, and I know they understand, like what different land are, what climate zones are. Because if you're going to talk about climate change and, you know, they don't have a clear understanding what climate is, or that we have different areas of different climate and what impacts climate, what impacts the environment, they don't see the interconnectedness of it. You know, what they're just getting is like that story of despair of how people are awful or whatever. And so, but they can start constructing like the issues within themselves when they have like a lot of vocabulary and background information. They can kind of see it, like how people impact the land, how land impacts people. And it actually worked out. You know, this is something that I didn't really have a lot of background in, but just kind of really focused and put a lot of time in. I didn't have a lot of, you know, there's so many ways I could have done it better. And I think that's one thing for new teachers on this journey is just like do it raggedy, I guess, and see what happens. It's because the time and effort that I put into it, like I had these kids who are in my eco club because we had talked about biodiversity and ecosystems and landforms and climate zones. When McDaniel students from who were in their eco club came over to our classroom and we were talking, like they had a real conversation about sustainability, about the environment. And the high school kids were saying, this is what we're learning in our AP course. You know, like, so my kids were already developing that vocabulary, which will allow them to access these larger issues even more, you know. And so it was kind of very organic how that conversation happened. And it was because I, you know, kind of laid a foundation for that vocabulary and those concepts that, you know, these are the different places in our hemisphere and what makes them unique. And it worked. So I was really excited about that. There was something else I was going to say about racism, and I'm just really like what everybody has said, you know, when it comes to like the connection between racial justice and climate justice. I just think like, you know, and gardens and thinking about biodiversity, there's a lot of power, you know, the most what do you call it? Strong ecosystems are ones that are the most biodiverse. And I think that goes with education, and that all these like jigsawing of what we're doing to teach climate justice and how that connects with racial justice. It needs all these different voices. And I think that, you know, the power of our district, because we have so many strong voices within our teachers, is to really invest in teachers, you know, like give them power. Like the way I think the best leaders are is the ones that really facilitate and empower the people who are the teachers or who are connected to the kids. And so, you know, to hear those different voices, to really, you know, invest in their development, their understanding is going to get to kids. And I think we need more of that. And that works for racial justice and climate justice.
Absolutely. So much knowledge and power here. It's beautiful to really hear all of these wonderful things that you're doing with your students and how they are carrying on this work. I'm seeing a lot of great resources being dropped in the chat too. So I just want to keep encouraging that. If there are resources that you want to share with folks here, thank you for sharing those things. And we've got just 5 minutes left here. So I want to open it up just for like final word, if there's any, you know, last words of wisdom or messaging that you would like to pass on to our fellow educators here, community members here. I want to open it up to all of our panelists.
I have one more thing I want to say. And actually speaking of Ada Crandall, she wrote about this recently in the Oregonian. I think that this generation has been hearing a lot that like, they're the generation who are going to save us. And I think that that's really unfair for them. And I think making sure that we make it clear that we understand that that's not really fair for them and that we are going to be with students in this fight. And that, I mean, yes, climate change affects us all unequally, but ultimately it affects us all. This is something that this is everybody's fight. And I really think that we need to stress that with kids, that we're not just going to put this on their shoulders and that we're going to be in the fight with them.
I might follow Susie with one lesson I feel like I learned from watching her, especially when she was when we were teaching together. She was a student teacher a couple of years ago, and you know, and it's to bring along with that, not putting the responsibility on this generation. It's to come to this teaching with as much joy and love and gratitude as we can muster, you know, teaching about this giant, overwhelming existential issue. But yeah, I mean, I think that is part of our job, is to continue to find and create those spaces where students can, as people have talked about so nicely today, but just to, you know, to really center joy and love and beauty in our teaching to the extent that we can, along with struggle. And but yeah, and I have to continually remind myself of that.
I want to ask something. Many of you are from the Oregon state, and there seems to be this movement about, even though the districts have not really come down together with the teachers, but there seems to be much bigger movement as far as climate change is concerned compared to Washington state, which is where I'm from. Now, has anybody thought of creating a kind of like a curriculum which can be used independently based off any subject? Like, for example, if you teach middle school science or high school biology, physics, chemistry, math, any of that, which can be used as a resources to teach. Because I feel that if you teach students, it's definitely going to make a difference. Awareness is very important, because the reason I'm saying that is because I come from India, and there is a American Disability ADA in this country, and right from kindergarten there is this inclusiveness where nobody is looked down if somebody has a disability. And students are taught to be compassionate and very helpful. And by the time they graduate from high school, they don't even think, it just becomes their nature to be helpful towards students of disability. If we teach our students, even though it's a small part, then that can really help. So again, my question is there a source, is there a place where you have created all these things you are doing in your class? Or can we create a pool of these resources which other teachers who are interested in climate change to be incorporated in their lesson plan that we can look at?
Great question. And I think amongst the folks here, right, there are so many resources available online. So thank you for dropping those things in the chat. And I think Ari or Bill, okay, Bill's in the chat, great, can speak to some of the resources available and like different mailing lists and whatnot that you could connect with, like Rethinking Schools and many that have been brought up in the chat.
If it's okay, I have just a few final thoughts as well that I think relate to this. I think all too often, I see this as a teacher, this is my 15th year teaching. Things are taught in isolation and kind of in a segmented way. Like, okay, now it's math time. Now it's, reading time, as opposed to seeing things as an integrated whole. And that's one of the things that I love best about working with my students, basically under the category of place-based education, education that is meaningful, that's relevant to their lives as much as possible, that's culturally relevant as well. And I've loved over the course of this year, working with my students in the garden, how we started just very simply with making observations. What do you notice? What do you wonder? And now at this point, having taught, a few different units, including one about the relationship between plants and animals, which is a PPS curriculum, seed, scat, habitat. And then now teaching a soil unit, I'm starting to see my students being able to make connections between not only plants and animals, but also plants and soil and animals, and basically how it all works together as an integrated whole. And every part affects the other parts, and seeing themselves within that integrated web, I think is really powerful, that they see all of these connections and how they impact things as well. But I agree that, I'd love for us ultimately to have a district-wide curriculum that's for climate justice. So it's not up to all of us in the trenches individually. And also from a racial equity standpoint as well, that it's not right that some kids are getting this and others aren't. I think that, all kids deserve a high quality, climate justice curriculum that's also, integrated with racial justice teaching as well.
Thank you. And I do unfortunately have to wrap this up, but I want to take a minute to thank all of our panelists for all of your work and all of our participants just for being here and being a part of this movement. And I hope that you do connect with each other in as many ways as possible so we can go ahead and keep this work moving forward. Thank you to Ari and PPS, and thank you to Bill and all of y'all doing this work. I know it's not new. You've been doing this work. So thanks for letting me share the space with you, and I hope y'all have a great evening. Bye.
Right on. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Okay.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Jackie, thanks. Tim, thanks for jumping in with the tech. Bill, thanks for all your help making this happen behind the scenes. Erica, you too. Thanks for that original brainstorming session you and I had on the phone months ago. I really kicked this off.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, Ari is assuming that your recording worked. Just, I guess, let me know if
stop that.
yeah. But thanks for doing that and getting that out.